You don't have a discipline problem. You have a rule problem. And the worst part is that these rules you're following, you made them up. You pulled them out of thin air and made them up. And despite the fact that it feels like they're doing something productive, it feels like they're helping you, they might actually be sabotaging your progress. You tell yourself things like, I have to work out 5 days a week. I have to get 10,000 steps a day. I have to post consistently on social media or I'm falling behind. I have to stay on track no matter what. And at first it feels productive, right? These really rigid, mandatory rules that you have to abide by and you have to follow, it just feels like you're being super disciplined, right? You are being the most productive person in the world. Look at this amazing schedule that you're sticking to. Look at this amazing thing that you're doing. You're so disciplined. But after some time, something shifts. And these really rigid rules and these really rigid structures that you have set for yourself actually end up being to your detriment. And trust me, I am somebody who gets caught in this cycle a lot. There is not much that gets my goat the way that tracking things and keeping streaks and checking things off a to-do list does. It just, satisfies something in my brain that I can't even put words to. It is so satisfying being able to do those things. And so it's very easy to get stuck in those very rigid routines where the ultimate goal is that you have to keep this streak, you have to check off this to-do list, you have to do this every single day because that was your plan, right? And if you don't, you're a failure. At least that's the narrative. So what happens in this case? Well, eventually, life gets in the way, because it will, right? Our life is not a string of perfect days where achieving our habits and checking off our to-do list is just infinitely easy. The world does not cater to that. That's just not how life works. So shit gets in the way and you fail. Or you do 80% of the things that you were wanting to do for the day. And instead of just adjusting and moving on, you catastrophize and you beat yourself up and you tell yourself you're a failure. And sometimes, for some of you, you quit because the pain and the discomfort of breaking these rigid rules you've set for yourself is too much to overcome. And suddenly you have this narrative that you can't stick to anything. You're not disciplined. You're a failure. Why bother taking on new goals because I obviously can't achieve them? When in reality, that's not true. The reality is that you have set yourself too rigid of standards that they just weren't sustainable. And on the flip side of this, even in the scenarios where you end up being able to stick to these very rigid routines and schedules, it can still be to your detriment. I'm going to give you a couple examples of this to help paint the picture for you. And the first one comes from a creator on YouTube called Adam Ivy, and this was actually what gave me the idea for the episode. So Adam has a lot of content related to YouTube growth and strategy, and I was watching one of his videos recently where he was talking about how forcing yourself to stick to a very rigid posting schedule can actually be to your detriment. And he gave the example of someone who has kind of the internal rule that you have to post every Tuesday morning at this time. But then life gets really busy and you haven't prepped the content, and so you find yourself scrambling late Monday night trying to throw together a video and just kind of piece together whatever you can in order to get something out in order to stick to this posting schedule. And he talked about how this could be to the detriment of your channel because the content that you were just kind of haphazardly throwing together in order to meet your own self-imposed deadline is probably not very good. It's probably not up to the standard that you want your content to be. And it ends up hurting the overall quality of your channel. Despite the fact that you stuck to your schedule, it ends up being to your detriment because you would have been better off giving yourself an extra couple of days and really polishing what you're doing and really bringing your best work to the platform instead of just shoving something out there because it's Tuesday at 5 a.m., right? And so this was what kind of triggered my thought process for this entire episode because it made me think of another example from my own life where early on when I started going to the gym, I had very rigid schedules. I had very rigid requirements that I had to hit, right? I had to work out for at least an hour. I think it was 7 days a week back then. I was working out like a maniac, but that was the rule. That was the rigid requirement that I had to stick to, and if I didn't stick to it, I was a failure and I sucked and I couldn't stick to anything, even though that's not even true. That was just the narrative that I had. And so I would show up every single day and I would do the full hour and I would do the thing, even when I was sick, even when I was injured, even when I hadn't recovered from the last several workouts I had done. Why? Because the main goal was just sticking to these rigid schedules and sticking to these rigid rules. That became the priority of everything that I was doing, and it took precedence over whatever my body actually needed, right? There were a lot of times where what would have been more beneficial for my overall progress and what would have been better for my overall health and would have been better for how I feel on a day-to-day basis would have been staying home and actually giving myself a rest day. But I wouldn't allow myself to do it because I had such rigid rules that I had to follow. And so this is where all of these kind of self-imposed rules and guidelines that you've put on yourself can become very harmful, because it's no longer about what is going to make you successful. It's no longer about what is going to help you achieve your goals. It's no longer about what is best for your own well-being. It is just about checking those boxes and sticking to those rules and sticking to that schedule, and you lose sight of everything else. And there's a reason that we do this. The place where I think you will probably see this pop up the most is when people are initially taking on something new. So let's say you have just started working out for the first time consistently. Let's say you have just started trying to clean up your diet for the first time. Let's say you've just started trying to post on social media in a way that you've never done before. We create these really rigid rules and guidelines because we think that they're going to help us stay consistent, right? They're going to help us stay on track. They're going to help give us very concrete parameters to work within so that we can show up and do the thing. And at first that can be really helpful, right? I don't want you to think that having some sort of rules around this and having some sort of standard for consistency is a bad thing, because there's a lot of places where it can be really good. And especially in those early stages, it can be really good for helping you build a routine. The problem is when you're never able to transition from sticking to these really rigid routines to being able to trust yourself enough to just show up in a productive way. And I think that's where the gap is for a lot of us. We don't trust ourselves enough to let go of the reins and still stick to our plan. I think a lot of us have this internal fear that if the really rigid rules and the really rigid structure is gone, you're not going to be able to stick to your plan. You're not going to make the progress that you want to make. You're not going to hit your goals because you don't trust yourself enough to keep showing up when the rigid rules and guidelines are not in place. And so this is what creates all of that anxiety around having to stick to these rules. And this is why those really rigid guidelines you put in place for yourself end up taking precedence over everything else, because they give you that sense of control. And they give you that sense of being able to show up because you don't think you're going to be able to otherwise. So instead of actually listening to what your body needs, instead of actually listening to what your mind needs, instead of actually thinking about what is going to get you closer to achieving your goals, you are just so focused on controlling the process and controlling yourself and beating yourself into this routine so that you can stick to your goals in some way, because you don't think you'll stick to them in any way without it. And so this is how you can get stuck in one of two cycles with these really rigid rules. The first one is you create really strict rules for yourself and really rigid guidelines, and you follow them initially, but then life gets in the way, and inevitably you fail, and you beat yourself up, and you drown yourself in guilt for not being able to stick to these rigid guidelines, and you throw in the towel completely. And then somewhere down the line, you decide to pick it up again, and so you recreate more rigid schedules and rules, and the entire cycle repeats itself over. And you just kind of get stuck in this repeated cycle of strict guidelines, forcing yourself into them, failing, guilt and shame, throwing in the towel, and then starting over, which is just unbelievably exhausting. Or on the flip side of that, if you do manage to stay within your really strict guidelines, you don't end up actually achieving your goals. You don't end up actually getting to where you want to go because you've lost sight about what is going to actually make you progress in the thing you're doing. You're still so caught up in just ticking boxes that you're driving yourself into the ground just to keep up with it. So I want to lean into a reframe for this. Instead of focusing on what the rules are and what the guidelines are and what the strict requirements are that you've set out for yourself, I want you to start thinking more about what's your end goal? Why are you doing the things that you're doing in the first place? Why did you start going to the gym? Why did you want to start eating healthier? Why did you start posting on social media? What was the main reason? What was your hopes for the end product of all of that? Once you have that, once you understand what your why is behind what you're doing, I want you to then ask yourself, what is going to be the best move for me today to get a little bit closer to that goal? And sometimes the answer is not sticking to your strict rules. Sometimes the answer is giving yourself a break and giving yourself a moment to step back and readjust and reevaluate, or allowing yourself to feel proud of the progress that you've already made instead of just consistently beating yourself up with guilt and shame over not doing enough and not being enough. And sometimes it means being flexible with your rules, not quitting completely, not throwing in the towel, but finding adaptable approaches so you can keep showing up, but in a way that works with your life. Some examples of this might be if you are still not fully recovered from a previous workout, or maybe you didn't sleep super well the night before. Maybe you still go to the gym, but maybe you really pull back on the intensity, or maybe you shorten the duration of your workout, or maybe you just walk on the treadmill for that day. Or maybe if you're posting content, it could look like delaying your post for a couple of days instead of pushing out content that you don't really feel proud of. It's the ability to adjust your plan instead of abandoning it completely. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? It doesn't have to be your very strict, rigid structure or nothing. There's a lot of in between. There's a lot of ways that you can adjust your plan in order to keep making progress and keep showing up in a way that's actually going to help you and not hold you back, right? There's a lot of scenarios where you doing something like this and adapting your approach is actually going to be the best thing for you long term. It's going to get you closer to your goals than you would get by just pushing yourself to give it 100%. I think there's a really common quote that kind of runs along a similar vein to this that says, like, if you only had 40% to give that day and you gave 40%, then you gave 100%, right? You don't have to give 100% of your capacity every single day and check all the boxes every single day. We don't operate like that, right? Humans don't have that much capacity every single day. It's going to fluctuate. Stuff's going to happen. Sometimes you need to pull back and adjust your approach, and that's fine. It doesn't mean you're not disciplined. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you're not capable of following through. In fact, you being able to adjust and adapt your approach based on what you actually need is a necessary tool for making this stick long term, because then you have the ability to work it around not just your best days, but all of the mediocre and all of the bad ones too. You now have a plan that fits around your life instead of forcing your whole life to adapt around it. Because right now, you don't trust yourself to be consistent unless you have these really strict rules forcing you to. But real consistency doesn't come from very strict rules. Real consistency that is actually going to survive over the long term comes from learning how to respond when things don't go according to plan, and from learning to listen to what you actually need in the moment. And so that's the skill you actually need to build. It's not more rules, it's not more guidelines, it's not more to-do lists. It's a little more flexibility and a little more kindness to yourself. That is what's going to help you follow through in real life, not just when conditions are perfect. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.